Well, we've all heard it. If you just stop eating carbs, you'll lose weight. But is that a myth? What happens long term? Today on Life and Food with Chef Mimi, we're going to be diving into the world of carbohydrates. Good, bad, ugly?
All right, carbohydrates. Word on the street is they're evil. And that all the problems in the world would be solved if everyone would just stop eating carbohydrates. So, what do you have to say about that?
Well, before we even get into that, let's go ahead and talk about what carbs are and how they function in our bodies. Because I think that sometimes if we don't have a basic understanding of a specific macronutrient or of a specific way of eating certain things, then, all you really have to go on is anecdotal information. And I believe that it's important when you are concerned with your health or you are on a weight loss journey or a health journey and you are attempting to have the best outcomes. I think what you need to start doing is researching and going back as many layers as possible, because the more you understand something, the more you can make it work for you. So, carbohydrates, let's just start with that. They're a macronutrient, just like protein, just like fat, and they're found in foods and drinks, right? So there's sugars, starches, and fiber. They're all carbohydrates. So your body really needs all the macronutrients to be healthy, obviously in varying amounts. So your digestive system breaks down carbs into glucose or blood sugar, and then your bloodstream absorbs that glucose and it uses it as energy. So it's kind of like gas, right? It's like the fuel for your body. So the amount of carbs obviously will affect your blood sugar. So if you take in a lot of carbs, it can raise your blood sugar levels. That's hyperglycemia, and obviously too high of blood sugar levels puts you at risk for diabetes. And then some people who struggle with the way they process carbs or who don't eat enough carbs can have hypoglycemia issues, which is low blood sugar. If you do not know what your A1C is and you are looking to embark on a health journey, you should probably have that tested. It is a different blood test than just your glucose level. Your glucose level will indeed, tell you if the amount of sugar, your fasting glucose level, if the amount of sugar is appropriate, high or low. However, what the A1C does is it goes through and it basically looks at the long term. I think it's like the 3 months of what your blood sugar readings would be and distills it into a handy dandy number. And that is what your doctor will run for you if they are concerned about you being pre-diabetic, etc. Healthy levels, I believe, are under 5.7. 5.7 to 6.5. 5 is considered like pre-diabetic, and then I think above that is considered diabetic. And of course, there's levels, right? The higher your A1C is, the more serious it is. So you definitely want to have that in the lower 5 range if possible. All right, so total carbohydrates are basically a combination of the 3 types of carbohydrates. So we already said that's the starches, the sugars, and the fiber. So when you are looking at a nutrition label, there will be a total number of carbohydrates. And then if you look underneath that, it'll tell you sugars, it'll tell you added sugars, it'll tell you fiber. And for a lot of people who are keto, they count their net carbs. So you'll hear that too, and you'll see that on a lot of food packaging. Things will say 0 net carbs, something net carbs. And what that is you subtract the fiber from the total carbs. A lot of companies will get away with claiming that an item is carb-free or has 0 net carbs, but that is not at all true. It just means that the carbs are made up completely of fiber. You're still taking in the carbs and you're still taking in the calories. It's just a very slow burning carb. So you just have to be careful of food packaging too, because there's a huge push. Keto is so popular right now that there's a really big push in food labeling and packaging about net carbs, and you need to be careful about that.
So back up for a second. I want you to talk to me a little bit about the difference between sugars and added sugars.
Sure. So sugars are just the naturally occurring sugars. So an apple obviously is going to have, X number of carbs, and it's fruit sugar. And so there's going to be sugar in that. Added sugars is when there's, let's say you're having a package of Thin Mints, then there's going to be added sugar. That's when sugar is actually put into an item. So sugars is just naturally occurring. Added sugars is when it's not naturally occurring.
So obviously the added sugars are usually the really detrimental ones.
Sure. Yeah, definitely worse for you. You want to stay away from added sugars. I believe the current recommendation is under 25 grams of added sugar a day for females. I don't know what it is for men. I'm sure it's more because they just in general get more calories because they suck. But for women, it's 25 or less. And let me tell you what, that might sound like a lot, but if you look at junk food, that's basically like one serving of junk food. It's really not a lot.
So it's a good idea if you're looking at those nutrition labels to try to find the option that has the lowest amount of added sugar.
Correct. Yes. And I'll talk about, there's like a rule when you're looking at your nutrition labels, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And that's to ensure that the carbs that you're choosing and the carbs that you're consuming are as complex as possible, which is going to segue right into what I wanted to talk about next, which is the difference between simple and complex carbs. And you hear this too. And I think sometimes, if you've never done any research on this sort of stuff and you just hear people talk about things, you're used to hearing terms, but you don't really know what they mean. For example, simple carbs, complex. What is a complex carb? Like you hear that all the time. Just like you hear, net carbs and things like that. Terms are just kind of thrown around in the diet world, in the fitness world, in the weight loss world, and there's not always a lot of information behind them. So basically, the way a food is made up, so its structure, and how quickly your body digests it, will determine whether that food is considered a complex or a simple carb. So I know that last week when we talked about protein, we talked about thermogenesis, which is what happens when you ingest food, your metabolism turns on and it starts working. And the reason why protein is so great, and we talked about last week, is that it takes the body a long time to digest. So it revs your metabolism up and you actually are burning calories while your body is digesting that protein. So it's the same thing with carbs, but no carb is going to be digested as slowly as protein. Protein is the one that takes the longest. So depending on how fast your body can digest that carb, if it digests it super, super fast, it's a simple carb. And as soon as that happens, your blood sugar spikes way up. If it takes a little bit longer to digest it, it's a complex carb. And that does not cause your blood sugar to spike quite as high. Some people will call them like good carbs or bad carbs, healthy carbs, unhealthy carbs. But simple and complex is a little bit easier to think about, I think, because when I think about the idea that you're putting something in your body that's so simple and easy that your body's going to digest it instantly and your blood sugar is going to spike right up, or complex, your body's going to have to work a little harder at. Simple carbs can contribute to weight gain. And a lot of that, there's a multitude of reasons for that. So one is that because they're simple, it means that they generally are more refined. And generally what that means, and this is, I'm speaking in general terms because you can always point out one or two things that it's like, well, see, this goes against it. And oftentimes it's like the exception that proves the rule. But generally, they're more calorically laden. So the more simple carbs you're eating, the higher caloric load you're taking in. And then generally, those simple carbs have a lot more sugar or added sugar. And as we talked about last week, the myth that, eating, too much fat can cause heart disease issues, high cholesterol issues. And really, the studies have proved out that mostly that is caused by too much sugar, or what we would say would be simple carbs. So eating too many of the simple carbs not only can cause weight gain, but it can also increase your risk of diabetes, heart disease, and high cholesterol. So if you are a child of the 90s like me, a bad word in the diet culture when I was growing up was starch or starches. Starchy food was bad for you. And that's actually not true. Starches are part of the complex carb family. So they're much healthier than the simple carb family. And it's so funny too, because I remember being heavy in my teens and quote unquote dieting, doing Weight Watchers, lots of different diet programs. And they would literally tell you like not to eat potatoes. Don't eat potatoes. They have starch. Oh, starch is so bad for you. But then you could eat these like 100-calorie packs of cookies. And that was supposed to be like, because you could track it because it was 100 calories, but God only knows how many calories were in that baked potato, but really it's the much healthier option when you look at it holistically. So it just kind of cracks me up. I mean, it's not funny, but it is funny. It's a macabre sort of sense of humor thing where I look back now at the diet culture when I was growing up and how many myths and how much bad information was out there. And I'm thankful now that there's definitely more of a focus on whole foods and having a balanced approach to nutrition. But still, sometimes when I'm looking at studies and I'm doing research or I'm reading articles and things like that, and I see these things, I'm like, wait, starch is bad. And then it's my knee-jerk reaction, from being 14 and trying to starve myself. But so really, starches are actually complex carbohydrates, and they are going to digest slower, which means that they're going to keep you full longer than the simple carbs. And then also, they're not going to spike your blood sugar as fast. And generally, complex carbs are going to have a higher ratio of fiber. So they're going to be better for you in the fiber aspect as well.
Whether you're an athlete, health-conscious foodie, or on a mission to shed those extra pounds, Mimi's Macros has got your back. Savor the taste of success with our delicious macro-balanced meals. Plus, there are no subscriptions and no minimums. Visit mimismacros.com to check delivery availability in your area. Mimi's Macros. Let us do the cooking, you focus on life.
So starchy carbohydrates are found in beans and legumes. So that's stuff like kidney beans, black beans, chickpeas, so things like hummus, lentils, stuff like that. Also fruits. So fruits are starchy complex carbs, like apples, berries, melons. There's some exceptions to these, but this is a general rule that, like I said, the exceptions only really prove the rule. And then your whole grain products are included in that as well, like brown rice, oatmeal, whole wheat bread, pasta, things like that, which these things are not bad for you, right? It's moderation and it's choosing the better options. And then your veggies are in there as well. So corn, peas, potatoes, that sort of thing. Those complex carbs are more complex, slower digesting, better for you because generally they have more fiber. Fiber is a complex, healthy carbohydrate. And what makes it so different than other macros or than other types of food that you're taking in is that your body can't actually break the fiber down and use it for anything. So when you're eating protein, right, your body's breaking that down. It's breaking it down into amino acids. It's using it to make more hair, make more muscle. When you are eating the complex carbs, not the fibrous parts, but the regular parts of the complex carbs, then your body's using that like gasoline, like fuel. It keeps you going, your energy. The fiber goes in and your body literally can't do anything with it. So it basically just passes through your intestines. And because it's not broken down into its most simple form, it stimulates your digestive tract. Let's say this in a family-friendly, not gross way. And it aids your digestion and it moves your waste product through your body a lot easier. That's why if you struggle with constipation, right, your doctor will tell you should really be increasing your fiber intake. Fiber also regulates blood sugar. It lowers your cholesterol. And it keeps you feeling full longer. So all of these things together, right? You have got the fiber, which does all these great things for you. And it's part of the carbohydrates that are better for you. And they're better for you because they have that higher fiber. So it's recommended that we consume 25 to 30 grams of fiber every day. If you are not actively tracking your fiber and you're eating a pretty standard American diet, generally speaking, you are probably getting 10 or less grams of fiber a day. When I first started tracking my macros, when I was on Kim Waite's program, Intentionally Fit, she had a whole week, dedicated to fiber, and I was tracking my fiber, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm eating this and I'm eating that. Like, surely it's going to be great. And I got to the end of each day and my fiber numbers were terrible. You have to really pay attention to make sure that you're choosing those items that have the fiber in it and so good for you. And of course, you can always supplement, but I'm telling you, it's a lot better to get your fiber from black beans or from eating the skin of your baked potato or any of those natural options than just to be taking a scoop of Metamucil every day and mixing it in, with your orange juice, a la the 90s diet culture. The other things that include a lot of fiber, besides the things that we already talked about, the fruits, the whole grain products, the vegetables, the fruits, the beans, the legumes, all those things contain fiber. Outside of the carbohydrate realm, fiber is also contained inside of nuts and seeds, generally very high fiber. Most of those, though, are going to fall into the fat category, which we'll talk about next week. But just putting that in there so that those are going to be your main sources of fiber. All right, so on the other end, then we've got sugar. So if we're on the good side or the healthy side of the carb timeline here or line graph here. On one side is the fiber. The higher fiber, the more complex, the better for you. And then if we swing all the way down to the other side, that other side is sugar. And the higher the sugar content in the carb, the less complex it's going to be. So the more simple it's going to be, the higher and quicker it's going to spike your blood sugar and the worse it is for you. The problem with the sugar levels is not the fact that they go so high so fast. The real problem with that is the fact that when they do that, they drop just as fast. And it's more the side effects you get from that are the problem than the actual spike in sugar. What generally happens is you consume something that has a high sugar load, you get a sudden burst of energy because your body gets these simple carbs, it burns it up super fast, provides you that quick burst of energy, and then you crash. And what happens when you crash? You start feeling miserable and you start craving more sugar because your body wants to figure out how to maintain an energy level. And so then you're craving more, or you're craving caffeine. Coffee might come with creamer, with sugar, or a soda, which is going to come with, an added caloric intake, or just caffeine in general. If you're consuming it later in the day, you might not be sleeping as well, and on and on and on. So you're wanting to avoid those high blood sugar spikes and drops. You want to keep that blood sugar level as stable as possible. You want to rev your metabolism up to about the same level and then just keep it humming along all day long. And you're basically treating your body like a machine. And if you were driving your car like that, where you were slamming on the gas, slamming on the brakes, slamming on the gas, slamming on the brakes, you're wearing your body out. You're wearing your metabolism out. People get adrenal fatigue from stuff like this. The better thing is to eat whole natural foods and eat them in a balanced way so that you just get your metabolism humming along without any sudden braking or, crazy acceleration. And then there's less wear and tear on your immune system, on your metabolism, on your body in general. When we look at sugar, though, it's important to denote the fact that there's two different types. There's naturally occurring sugars. So, for example, like milk, there's a naturally occurring sugar in milk. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sugar. There's nothing wrong with glucose and fructose. But then there's added sugar. Okay, so added sugar you're going to find in your baked goods, your sweets, your snacks, ice cream, candy bars, anything that you would consider more on the unhealthy side of the carbohydrates. Now, I will say here, and this can kind of be where things get confusing, is that your body will process all sugar the same. So whether it's a naturally occurring sugar, like the kind found in fruit or the kind found in milk, or it's an added sugar, like high fructose corn syrup that might be in ice cream or something like that, your body will process those sugars the same. Your body doesn't know whether that sugar is coming from an approved healthy source or an unapproved unhealthy source. The natural sugars generally are going to they're going to come loaded with or packaged with vitamins, minerals, sometimes fiber, or healthy fats in the case of milk, things like that. You figure an apple, yes, an apple does have naturally occurring sugar, and your body can't tell the difference between that apple and a package of cookies. However, that apple is coming with fiber, which slows down your body's response to that sugar. Whereas that pack of cookies, there's no fiber in there. There's no vitamins and minerals in there. That's just the added sugar. So it's a much more simple type. A lot of times health foods are going to they'll use like date sugar or dates as a sweetener, a naturally occurring, but still a sugar. So you'll see like agave nectar, cane syrup or corn syrup, dextrose, fructose, sucrose, and then, you've got like honey, molasses, and then just sugar as well. Lots of different names for it. The other thing too is that you have to figure that the higher sugar content, the more added sugar an item has, generally it's going to have a higher caloric load. I don't love looking at the calories of anything anymore because for me, it's a lot easier to have a balanced approach to food when I look at the macros. But generally speaking, if you look at something and there's 60 grams of carbs in, one serving of something and that 30 grams of it is added sugar, you better believe you're looking at, a gigantic calorie load. And plus that's, if you're counting your macros, that's basically blown out, your added sugars for the day and more. And then a large portion of your carbs. It's important to try to limit the added sugar. By limiting your added sugar, literally, if you just pay attention to that one number, you won't even have to really think about the idea of, is this complex? Is this simple? Because all of the foods that you should be avoiding are going to have that added sugar and you should be staying away from in general. So if you just pay attention to that one number, if all of this sounds really overwhelming, if you just pay attention to that one number and try to keep it under 20 grams of added sugar a day, that will already make a huge difference for you. And you won't have to look at, well, how many grams of fiber to how many grams of carbs. Just stay away from that added sugar number. And that's for women, by the way, that 20 to 25 is for women. And I think it's 35 for men. It's hard to talk about like what the recommended carb intake is for people because that's very, very activity specific. And it's very dependent on medical conditions that you might have. So for example, if you are diabetic or pre-diabetic, you should probably not be consuming as many carbs as someone who does not have that issue. If you have insulin resistance or polycystic ovarian syndrome, you should generally be sticking to a lower carb diet. So there's multiple things that come into play. So it's hard to just say like, oh, well, your recommended intake of carbs is X amount. That's why it's important to find someone who can work those numbers out for you. That's why I recommend Kim's program, because she does look at your health history and everything else that you have going on and is able to give you personalized numbers based on yourself. You can go and you can look at any calculator online, but they're just punching out a set standard of numbers based on your height and weight without any other indications of, what you might need to personalize that to yourself. We talk about eating no carb or low carb. And we talked about keto a few weeks ago when we talked about, fad diets and diet myths. And the thing about keto is that they've done studies, and basically the short-term studies show that keto or limiting your carbs or going, low to no carbs leads to weight loss. However, once you get past 1 year, all of the indicators are that then there is regain. All of the studies show that after 1 year, anyone who's doing the low carb and no carb, their weight either will plateau or begin to go back up. And a lot of times that's because it's just unsustainable. and it's hard to maintain the discipline to avoid those foods for so long. And it just goes back to, the drum that I beat all the time, which is don't do anything drastic. Try to keep all of your levels at a point where you're not feeling deprivation or you're having specific food avoidances. The way you want to go forward with this is making smart decisions and limiting the ones that are not as healthy for you, prioritizing the ones that are better for you, picking those nutrient-dense carbs that are going to have the fiber and the vitamins and the minerals, and, look for the added sugars and eat those in moderation. Now, the other thing is called the 10-1 rule, and I do find this interesting. And for people that are really looking at nutrition labels or really planning out their macros carefully, this might be a great tool for you. However, if this feels overwhelming and confusing, like I said, just pay attention to your added sugars and that'll be fine. But let me talk about this 10-1 rule. So basically, they recommend that you choose foods where for every 10 grams of carbs, there's 1 gram of fiber. And that's easily scalable. For example, if it's a food that has 40 grams of carbs, you should be looking for 4 grams of fiber or more. And typically, I believe these are guidelines that are typically given to diabetics or people that are struggling with blood sugar. But it is kind of an easy way if you're picking something up in the store and you're looking at what that carb load is. Let's say it's 50 grams of carbs, per serving. That fiber better be at 5. If it's at 2, you know that there's probably not enough in there to make it as complex as you need to hit those macro goals that you want to hit. It's just about switching up your mindset and thinking about carbs as multiple things put together and then trying to focus on the carbs that are going to have more of the good things packaged with it as opposed to the bad things packaged with it.
All right, so lately I've been hearing a lot about the glycemic index and about that will tell you if something's going to spike your blood sugar. And how does that fit in here? How does that help?
Yeah, so the glycemic index, it's a system that ranks food based on how much that food will increase your blood sugar when it's compared to pure glucose. So it basically ranks everything so that you can see which foods are quote unquote the best or which foods are quote unquote the worst. So it's a tool. It's important not to go off of that tool completely. It's important to know what's behind it, and it's important to use common sense when looking at it. So for example, if you look at the glycemic index, it's going to show you that a baked potato is pretty high on the glycemic index because it's a white starch, which is, again, 90s child here. White starch was like the worst thing that you could eat.
I know, but I love me some taters. I can't help it.
Same. And they're actually so good for you. They're really high in potassium. They're high in fiber. There's actually protein in baked potatoes. I mean, or just potatoes in general. They're quite good for you. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is how often do you ever sit down and just eat a baked potato on its own? It's pretty uncommon. So you have to figure that generally if you're going to be sitting down and eating a baked potato, you're probably going to be eating it with dinner. And your dinner is probably going to be some chicken, some vegetables, your baked potato. That is going to change your blood sugar and how it reacts to that potato because you're taking it in with other food. The glycemic index can only tell you what will happen to your blood sugar if you eat that specific food by itself. And a lot of times these foods that are listed are not foods that we eat by themselves. So it's important to use it as a tool, but understand that it's not the end all be all when it comes to what that's going to do to your blood sugar. Or you can use it as a tool and you can look at something that's high on the glycemic index that you really want to eat, and you can still eat it and pair it with a protein, and that will slow down the spike in the blood sugar. Okay, so it's like I said, it's just a tool. You can use it however you want to use it. And then the other thing too is that it's a ranking system, and so it doesn't tell you about the nutritional component of what you're eating. So for example, on the glycemic index, a soda has a rating of 63. Raisins have a rating of 64. However, raisins and soda do not have the same nutritional value. Raisins are a whole food that's been processed by, being put in the sun and being dried. So they're concentrated. That's why the sugar content is higher. But there's vitamins and minerals and fiber inside of raisins, and the soda is just sugar and water. It's important to use common sense when you're looking at the glycemic index. And then I did want to talk about working out, because that is a big part of my life. And I think generally, if you're on a health and fitness journey, that's going to become, or is, a big part of your life right now. And you have to take into account your physical activity levels when you're taking into account your carbohydrate needs. And then you also want to pay a little bit more attention on how you're taking in your carbs before and after workouts. You should be consuming carbs before your workouts. Actually, I should probably split this up. Let's just talk about high intensity interval training or cardio. So we're talking about something like jazzercise or, Orange Theory or, a boot camp, something like that, where there's going to be a lot more cardio. Your heart rate's going to be spiking up a little bit higher. So you're going to need the energy. If you don't fuel yourself and you go and you're just dragging yourself around and you can't complete the sprints and you can't do the actions that you need to do, well, that's not great. Are you there to move your body and to get your heart rate up and to have those endorphins and have that experience? Or are you there just to check something off your to-do list because you're going to burn 230 calories and that's what you need to burn today? So if that's the headspace that you're in, first of all, maybe take a step back and reevaluate that. But if you're headed to, a workout like that, you're going to need to have carbs before your workout in order to give you that fuel that you need for your body to optimally perform. And the further away from your workout that you can eat, the more complex carbs you should eat, because you're thinking about how long is this going to take to digest. So if you're 2 hours out from a workout and you eat peanut butter on whole grain toast, stuff like that, it's going to be an excellent source of carbs because it's a whole grain source. It has fiber. You're pairing it with, something that has fat, so it's going to slow that digestion down. Fantastic choice. The closer you get to a workout, the more simple you need to get with your carbs in order to give you that burst of energy. That's why you see, for example, marathon runners have, they're just glucose packets. They're basically just ingesting pure sugar because their body needs that much energy to go. You just want to be careful that you're not utilizing your workout as an excuse to just eat crap right before your workout. But if you haven't eaten all day and you're headed to a workout, try to choose something that's going to be a little higher in carb, maybe have a little bit more complexity to it, just so that you have what you need to make it through the workout. And then also just be careful if you're eating really close to a workout, not to eat a ton of protein and fat with your carbs, because they do take so long to digest that oftentimes they're kind of sitting like lead in your stomach. And you can really struggle with that, especially if you're doing high cardio, because your body is going and going, and then you have this lead balloon of protein in your stomach, and that's generally when you end up puking, during a workout. And I do not recommend that. I do not recommend that. So that's important. And then also you need to eat carbs after your workout to sort of refuel. Post-workout, you're going to want to make sure that you're taking in protein, but you're going to want to make sure that you're taking in carbs with your protein. The protein is going to help you rebuild and repair those muscles, build up the muscles, and the carbs are going to sort of restore a lot of that fuel that your body used up during that workout. And I think coming from a diet culture that's about eating as little as possible and punishing your body as much as possible, it's a very difficult mindset to get into, the idea that you are going to eat kind of like the calories that you're going to be burning. You're going to eat those before and after your workout. And you're like, wait, the whole point is to go and burn those calories. But it's really not. The point is to make your body an efficient machine that will be burning calories all day long while you are just existing. It's not about the workout. The workout is to build strength. It's to build cardiovascular fitness. It's for enjoyment. It's for stress relief. It's for endorphins. It's for joy. And so you have to make sure in order to have a good workout that you're fueling yourself before and after. And you have to kind of take away that idea of scarcity and calorie counting in order to achieve that mindset and in order really to achieve that joy in exercise. Now, I will say, if you are not doing a lot of cardio and you're strictly doing strength training, you are just going into the gym and you might, get on the bike for 15 minutes before you do your workout, but you are mostly lifting heavy, really, really heavy, you need fewer carbs, but you have got to preload and postload with tons of protein because you're doing a lot more of the long range muscle fiber building, and that's going to require the protein like we talked about last week. What I'm talking about specifically is super high intensity, very high heart rate, cardiovascular type workouts. So, you have to look at what your activity level is, and then you've got to move stuff around so that you're making the right choices. And that might look different on different days. If you have a day where you're going for a run, you may want to increase your carbs that day. You may want to swap out, your super high protein dinner for a more balanced dinner with more carbs and protein. If you have on deck for the day that you're going to be going to the gym and you're going to be trying to, do your personal record in deadlifts and you're just going to be moving a ton of weight, well, then you're going to want to be majorly loading up the protein before and after that workout. Then I do want to get into studies just for a second. I know we're probably starting to run long here, but I did want to talk about some studies because it's really hard for me with the mindset that I am coming out of, with the idea that carbs are the devil. They are literally the worst thing for you. And the two worst words are white starch. No, I can't eat that. It's so bad for me. And it's really, really difficult coming out of that mindset. So what helps me when I am looking at something like that and I'm struggling, and I know I'm only struggling because of an idea that I have from a formative time in my life, is to look at studies. I did pull up just a couple studies. In this study, they studied a lot of people. I think it was like 200,000 participants. And they did not have any cardiovascular disease at the time of the study, diabetes, none of those things. They were just strictly healthy individuals. And they followed them with their carbohydrate intake over a follow-up time of 10 years. And I love studies like this because I feel like anyone can do something for 2 months and say like, oh, we did this study and after 2 months there was an improvement. Yeah, but what about 10 years? What about really long term? That's important. So I always try to look at long-term studies when I'm looking, but they followed them over about 10 years. And basically what they looked at was that the total carbohydrate intake of all of these participants was not linked to their cardiovascular disease at all. However, the participants who had a higher sugar intake or simple carb intake of that total carb number had a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. Those participants in the study who were eating whole grain and starches as opposed to refined grains and sugars, they had a much lower incidence of high triglycerides, any cardiovascular disease at all. They actually had a lower range than the median population. So the conclusion of that obviously was that higher sugar intake, higher simple carb intake is associated with a higher cardiovascular disease incidence, higher triglycerides, etc. But the higher fiber intake and the replacement of those refined sugars with whole grain starches and non-free sugars, which would be naturally occurring sugars, protect against cardiovascular disease, which is fantastic. If that's something that runs in your family, high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, just upping your fiber and paying attention to that 10-1 rule or just watching the added sugar numbers can make a huge difference for you. And then another one on weight, which I think is, great to look at in terms of keto, for example. This was at 4-year intervals. And again, they studied somewhere around 200,000 men and women, very healthy, no disease instances, no gastric conditions or anything like that. And basically what they did is they looked at their glycemic load and glycemic index, basically how much added sugar, right? This is what it is added sugar. The carbohydrate quality and source was very important for long-term weight management, especially for people that were already overweight. So basically, people who were already overweight, if they limited their added sugar and refined grains in favor of whole grains, fruit, and non-starchy vegetables, they had a long-term slow weight loss over each 4-year period where they were checked in on. What the study is basically proving out is that making those small changes, you might not see drastic results like going keto, for example, where you're dropping 10 pounds the first week, 30 pounds the first 6 months, but then it's not sustainable. What they're showing in this study is that if you're already an overweight person and you just limit those added sugars and the refined simple carbs, and you're focusing on the starchy carbs and the whole grains, the legumes, the beans, those things with higher fiber options, that over time your weight will just come down naturally without you having to do anything. I think studies like this are important because they prove out the whole ethos that I have come to believe about being healthy and losing weight and choosing the right foods and longevity and just health in general, right? Is that the long-term changes that you make, they're small, and you make them one at a time until they just become part of who you are. You're a person and you don't drink alcohol. You are a person who exercises 3 times a week. You are a person who prioritizes protein at your meals, right? These are small tweaks. And it doesn't have to be at every single meal. You can still have a piece of birthday cake. You can still plan for those special occasions. You can skip a workout here and there if you're sick or if your schedule doesn't allow it. But that doesn't change the ethos of who you are because you've made these changes to yourself. So all of these little things, it's nothing drastic. It's little things. I'm going to eat this because it's higher fiber, and I'm not going to eat this because there's no fiber in it. I'm going to eat this because it makes me feel better and I don't have a sugar crash. Or when I do eat this, that's a higher glycemic index, or is going to spike my blood sugar a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and eat this with a protein so that I mitigate that. All of these little changes, studies show the sustainable small changes that you can keep going with day by day that aren't going to kill your joy. They're not going to take away, the motivation that you have going forward. They're easy to do and they're easy to sustain over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but over time, these small changes stacked up one on top of the other leads you to a long, beautiful, healthy life. And so I think it's especially important when we look at something like carbohydrates, which gets such a bad rap and has such a negative connotation when it comes to health and weight loss. I think it's important to take it on balance, just like all of these other things, to approach it in a sustainable way to research it, and then to use it like every other macros that we have, like every other tool that we have, to fuel our bodies as efficiently as possible to have the healthiest life that we possibly can.